Hello, this is Sherlock of Elementary Airsoft, and today we're back here to work on and look at our modding steps for converting our Dominator DM870 from the Dominator shell to the APS shell. So, just to recap from last video, if you didn't see the teardown, we're going to be looking at doing three things. We're going to remove the block that's in here. That's designed for the front barrel spring to rest up against. We are going to modify our firing pin here so it will fire all the way into the cartridge, detonating the cartridge and staying far enough forward that we can unlock the breech. And we're going to be installing the real steel bushing so we can use real steel body pin in the rear of it, and we'll be drilling out the receiver to accept that pin. So I guess first off, tools that you need, hammer, pin punches, and that's about it. And or I guess we could go by application. So we don't need the receiver for now. We'll come back to drilling that out later. And I think we'll start with the easiest modification, and that's our rear trigger pin. Here you can see I've actually already installed our new push pin. Actually, I'm going to release our hammer here so it's not on tension. It's a good idea to do this by holding your finger over it and just slowly releasing it so it doesn't go flying forward or we don't lose any springs or bits and bobs. But basically, this was a bit of guesswork on my part and a bit of measuring and finding some measurements online, but basically I determined from the front pin dimensions, which is really close to real steel pin dimension, and this bushing and just its assembly, parts diagram in general, it looks really close to a real steel one. And then I managed to free this pin here from the body. So this pin, if you see it here, is as a bigger end and a smaller end. So the big flat end is on the left side of the trigger unit, and you can see the indentation here. So this would be sitting in here originally. So you have to push it out from this side and just do it either with a gap in between it, or you can just open the jaws of a vise if you have a vise. And then you're just going to pin punch, tap it out. It will need a reasonable amount of force because if we look at this guy here, we see that it kind of scallops up to the front here, and that's for retention, which made it really a pain in the butt for me to figure out what's happening here. And these two little stubs on either end are what catches into our notches in the receiver. So it'll, in the trigger unit, it just sort of slides and locks in there that way, which seemed to line up with the holes pretty well, but we'll get into moving that later. So anyhow, remove this, and then for real steel 870, I ordered the following parts. So first and foremost, you need Remington trigger plate pin bushing, rear 870, this 1100 11-817. Now you can add links to the description to Midway USA, where I purchased these. All three pieces cost about 20 some bucks shipped it was. So that's this piece. So this is the bushing. And then we add the pin detent spring rear for the 870. 1100, and that's 11-87. Okay, so it must be these other numbers on the top. This must be part number 954908. But anyhow, I'll put links in the description rather than that. And there's a little slot in here, and he just slips. The flat part slips over there. You just kind of wrap it around. And this is what's going to serve as your detent in these grooves. The flat part will notch right in there and hold it from moving. Normally it would hold it from moving under the explosive recoil of real gun, but we don't have that. And then of course the rear body pin, which I believe, I don't have my calipers handy, but I believe is a 1/4 inch hole, so 1/4 inch drill bit. It's looking mighty fine. They might use a step drill or something maybe better, but we'll cover that part later when I get there. I haven't done that one yet. But basically, after you get your detent on there, you're going to slide it in from left to right. And you may notice in here that the trigger there, that's part of the trigger. So you may need to pull that forward a bit. And he's just press in there. And with it all the way in, it sits almost flush on the opposite side and flush on this side. So it'll slide up into the body just fine. So the other advantage that this is going to give us is we should be able to service. Let's see here. This will go better with the hammer cocked, I believe, because we need to get our breech lock up. It's going to allow us to both put in and remove, oops, I didn't want to do that, the trigger mech without pulling the butt plate, because now you can pull it pretty much straight down to get it out or down and sort of wiggle her out like you would on a real 870. So that's great, and you know, our pin goes through it. This pin is slightly longer or wider rather than the stock pin here. So that, I don't think it's really going to make any visible, notable difference. So, ta-da, very simple. We just use a real steel one. The other interesting part is, I feel like a lot of these parts, if we need to replace them, we could probably make the real steel one work, or make it fit with very little effort. So that's probably pretty good. So most of this is all steel in here, so I'm not too concerned about anything wearing down. The shell lifter here does have a bit of burrs on it, which I may dust here before final reassembly, but there you go. That part's mounted, and all we have to do is drill this guy out, and then we can mount, use the real steel pins, and we can mount side saddles like a real steel gun would, or even the APS does, but the APS uses 2 of the same diameter pins. If you look at it, this guy, he's much bigger than either of these, so it's good to know. So that's out of the way. And I'd say let's move on to perhaps the next simplest one to tackle, and that is our firing pin. So once again, we're going to need either 2 blocks of wood of equal height or a vise or something. I did this initially the first time around in the vise. And then what we're going to do, so I've actually already removed it in this case, but there is this bushing that sits right in here, and the firing pin goes through it. Just to understand how that works, firing pin pushes forward, and this bushing just keeps the firing pin from coming all the way back out. There's no vertical pin or anything like what the Cam 870 uses. It notches through there, and that's what keeps it both from coming out backwards and from rotating. There isn't any of that. But you do have a couple options, and I'll detail the route that I'm going to take. So we have a bushing in here. You take the closest fitting pin punch to the center of the firing pin. You should see it's obviously silver and different. And we're just going to tap it out until he comes free. And then he'll drop right out. Currently, for testing here, I have a plastic bushing that is shorter, so about half height in here. But the plan would be, so we still need to retain our pin so it doesn't fly out the back, but we need it so when this gets pushed flush by our hammer, that we just have just the pin sticking out, and that's what's going to detonate our shells. And this will just be enough. And so the other option, if you want, which I'll probably end up doing, or I'll either make a better one, is you could just cut this bushing in half, and then using your pin punches, you're going to just start it on there, and then once again, well, you shouldn't even need the pin punches. To put it on, we're just going to invert it, set it so our blocks of wood are spaced far enough apart for the center firing pin, and we're going to tap it from this end. You may want to reach in to the inside of it and apply some downward pressure with your finger on the firing pin just to take up any slack, and you're going to tap it and tap it and tap it until our firing pin sits flush and the bushing is pushed so it's flush with the front plate here. And ta-da! There's not any wobble or movement in the front of the pin really, and it will work with these, it'll work with these. However, I do want to touch, there are a few other options you can do. So you could use the full-on APS setup, but for that what you're going to need to do is after you remove the pin, I'd probably remove your extractor here, like you would on a real steel. It just kind of hooks out. And then you could drill this opening to enlarge to accept our, I guess, donut bushing is kind of what I've been calling it. And then as well as you're going to need to get a pin, and you're going to need to drill that vertical hole here and fit a pin to there, and you're also going to need to reduce the diameter of this guy here, and you're probably going to need an APS spring for it because this spring's too long to work with this firing pin, just because the spring detent on the Dominator pin is further back than it is on the APS pin. And then once again you're just going to press fit that on here, but I opted to just try and use the Dominator pin. And it's, in my mind, less invasive to the Dominator thing if I ever wanted to revert it for no apparent reason. And it's pretty simple or straightforward. You just need to cut this, pull it off, cut it in half, put it back on. And there you go. You do want to note that when you remove the firing pin, the front end of it, stock is slightly flared, so you may want to dust the edges lightly so it isn't expanding your bushing too much as you put it on. It looks like they took some sort of center punch and peened the center so it would flare out and hold it on there super good, but I believe this fits pretty tight. So that should do it, or you could probably clamp it a bit, squeeze it and tighten it a bit so it can go on there, or you could 3D print something, or you could drill something out that's close. There's a bajillion options. Like I said, right now I'm using just a temporary piece of like acrylic here. I don't think that's going to be long term. I'll probably get something out of aluminum. But ta-da! Bolt now will function and will fire APS shells, and it will still eject. Moving on. Now this is probably the most evil part, and I need to go grab something here. And this is what you're going to need the weirdest pieces of hardware for. So I'm going to go back up to full wide. So what's in here? What sits right here, I've already have it removed, so sorry I didn't do this live, this is the bushing that sits in the front of the gun that this sits on. If we look here, that's where it's welded. So what they did is before this ring mount here was put on, they drilled a hole, they put this bushing in, they welded it. Apologize for doubting you, my French friend. I was sincerely hoping in my inner gut that it was something in translation that was lost, but it is welded. And then they welded this piece on top of it. So this is sitting in there, and we have to punch it out. And from his suggestion, or from somebody that suggested to him, was just take a rod and pound it out. I did try with a 1/2-inch dowel, but the dowel just kind of got damaged and or destroyed. So what I did is, this is a piece of aluminum rod. I also had a backup piece of 1/2-inch steel rod, which would probably be what I'd recommend. You probably need about a 2-foot section. Now what I did, so you don't mar up the receiver end of things, is I took a Forstner bit that was about the same diameter as the outside, and I took 2 chunks of 2x4. What I did is I placed this on the seam of the 2 chunks of 2x4, and I just traced around the edge. And I set up my Forstner bit with these 2 clamped in a vise, and I was like, okay, aligned it so that the circle would align with the line I drew. And then I marked the depth with a piece of tape for this depth, and then I just drilled into the block until I hit that piece of tape, and that told me I was at the right depth. So I wanted as much support as I could, so this is sitting on a piece of wood and this is sitting on a piece of wood. What I did then is I took my pieces of wood apart, spun them around so I'd have a flat surface, and then my top piece, screwed them together with just 2 wood screws to help hold it for me, and ta-da! It will slide in there nice and nifty. So realistically you just want some piece of wood or something soft for this to sit on so you don't mar up its finish. Now likewise on the rod, this was used, I have no clue what for, how for, but something that was banging around that was about the right size, it'll fit in the bore. Then I barbershop pulled it with some tape to just keep it from rubbing off the inside of the barrel, because there's actually a pretty nice finish on the inside here, which is nice, to be honest. So then obviously we're going to, let's try and get it in camera here. Let's bring it down. So then just imagine if this was on the ground. You would just bring this down to set on the barrel, and I'm dropping it a bit lower here. You're just going to take your hammer. You're going to need to apply a pretty good amount of force, like a good sharp tap to start with, or a good sharp whack. You just want to make sure that whatever rod you're going to use is big enough that A, it won't fit into the bushing, and B, it won't really flex. Like the wood was absorbing too much of the energy, I think. When I did this, I was also sort of hoping that it was soldered. So I had heated it up to about 400 degrees using a heat gun. You don't want to really go blowtorch or go super hot on it. It may help you knock out it, but we don't want to deform the barrel, and I didn't want to harm the finish. Like I said, this is, I'm pretty sure, is a blued finish, and it looks pretty nice, so I didn't want to damage that. So another thing that I recommend, especially if you have your rod taped, is actually before you start, put a mark on it. Like here you can see I have a pencil mark. Put a mark about where it is, you know, give it a good whack, kind of tell if it moves. And once it starts moving, here's what I recommend you do. Like if you get it to move 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, pull out your barrel, flip it around, set it on the piece of wood or on the flat piece of wood, and then tap it back the other way, about 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And why are we doing this? Is because when you break this free, it's not going to necessarily be even. So I want to sort of push it down, break it, push it back the other way, kind of break the burrs, and kind of tap it back and forth a bit to break off any burrs to get it smoother. Because what I did when I punched it out is there was a, I don't think I can get it on camera, because there was a bit of a burr on here, and when I punched it all the way out towards the back end, because this barrel, I'm pretty sure, has a very slight taper to it inside. So I pushed it out towards the back, because to me that was the path of least resistance. It did leave a scratch on the bottom side where there was that weld mark and there was that burr. So if you tap it back and forth a bit, because there's a hole in the barrel here, it'll help knock off any burrs on the hole and any burrs on this piece. So I'll knock it one way and then knock it the other way a bit, and then knock it this way a bit, and then knock it that way a bit, and then punch it out, and you're just going to have to live with the result. Alternatively, you can have a board / milled out, but I didn't have access to it, and I think this is cheaper or easier for me. Fleet Farm or some hardware stores will carry up to like 1/2-inch rod stock. So that is what I recommend. There may be some other options, but it's pretty difficult. As far as this bottom hole, I'm probably going to reseal that with something likely 3D printed, like a little 3D printed plug. You could use hot glue. Honestly, I might even just hot glue it. Or silicone, make a little silicone plug in there. You just don't want to stop up any air leaks. I did, given that mine, I didn't know about it, and there was, like I said, a bit of burrs. I used a piece of 1/2-inch PVC, and no, not actually 1/2-inch PVC. I used my 1/2-inch dowel, and I put on a little chunk of 400 grit sandpaper, and I taped over most of it and built a bit of tape underneath it, so I have a really small area that's available, and then I just kind of slid it in till it's in this spot, and then I applied my downward pressure and tried to clean up that area where it was welded a bit until I could see it seem nice and pretty smooth, at least, and then ran some swabs through it with some silicone oil just to clean up any gunk, because there is gunk left in it, like there was some other stuff on the rest of the receiver. But then you have this guy out, so we can push one of these APS wads all the way through the barrel without too much trouble, really. Which is great. So this will fire, and beautiful. So there you have it. We have our 3 core mods done. We're inside of drilling this. So I'm going to go drill that out, and I'll splice that video. Oh, guess I'm too zoomed in. Going to drill out the receiver. I'll add in that chunk of video, and then we'll go through playing and installing all of the new toys, which is what the shotgun was supposed to come with, namely all the Magpul furniture or clone Magpul furniture, the extended tube +1 to get that 7+1 capacity, fiber sight, front CNC sling mount, bearing mount thing, fancy pants safety, top rail with ghost ring sight, and make it all tactical. And that's going to be next phase, and finish up, and then I'll probably follow this up after I have some good use of it with the APS shells in the field, sort of an overall review, more comments on the quality and the build of it, how it's holding up, and how it works with the APS shells overall. But yeah, it's been really fun, and I'm really excited to work on it some more. Okay, so this is the next part of how we're going to drill out our receiver here to support the larger real steel body pin in place of the fake one. So what I've done is I fitted the drill with a step drill. Otherwise you can use 1/4-inch drill bit, but I'd recommend stepping up drill bit sizes to get there, so you'll end up with a cleaner, rounder hole if you go that route. But step drill pretty much kind of has that built in, and it's good for drilling accurate hole through flat stock, which our receiver kind of is. So I've drilled a test hole here, and we have a nice, it's literally like perfect fit for the body pin, but we may have to go in and dust it off with a file or whatever to get a perfect fit. And then the next thing I've done, so went ahead and verified just by sticking the pin in here. And then I stuck it through the receiver and then lined up the hole. I know you can't see it on camera, but basically what I wanted to make sure is that this fake body pin is actually centered. So I've confirmed that it is actually centered, at least on my gun. Centered for where I need to drill my hole for the rear body pin. So I'm going to open up my vise. Just going to clean her off a bit. Put it into the shaving so we don't mar up our body. slides it in. Make sure that it's level. So realistically, you only really have one go at this. As far as what specific bit I'm using, it's a high-speed steel step drill from Irwin. And here I'm just using that center dimple to align my bit and get it started. So we have our holes drilled, both sides. Let's zoom this in a bit. Both sides. We can put in our real steel body pin all the way through. So now just to show a complete piece, we're going to put back in these arms. A bit more fiddly than expected. No, I'm putting these in backwards. Yeah. So the one with the long indentation, that goes on the left side, looking at it top down. The other one goes on the right side. And what's important to do with these is line up their holes here, because they do go, the front body pin does go through them. Sadly, this one isn't really wanting to hold in there super good. There are little notches on the arm itself. So if you look here, there's little dooders, and that helps give it some grip in the receiver. So just because the trigger sits on either side of these, I'm just going to have this in first, and then for the rest of reassembly we shouldn't need to really pull the trigger or touch any of that really. But so those are in place. And let's see here, is it going to be easier? It's going to be easier with the hammer cocked. Hammer cocked, I'm going to put on safe. And the sort of fiddly part here is you look at this, and that's our bolt catch arm, so he kind of needs to angle in there first. Then you should just be able to push it up and in. I'm just going to line these up. Push the push pin through. Actually, this one I may do it from the other side. Here. Just because the detent rings on this side, just so I didn't have to push both through. I'll just take a piece of wood here, or but I'll just tap it with the hammer. He comes out, oops, and our rear body pin. He goes in, and ta-da! You have fitted, no wobble there. And with your stock, now if your stock's fitted like this, on there we should just be able to punch the pins, drop the unit out without pulling off the stock or doing any weird slidey things. And we can also mount real steel side saddles and stuff, so that's great. So that's modifications done, and then I'll go do a reassembly video how to put the gun back together from all spare components, as well as put in my upgrade pieces. And we'll do some sort of like some testing and showing some stuff there then too. Thanks, and sorry about the length on this one, guys.